All right, guys, is everyone in the call? Are you reading me?
Yeah, here.
Barry, I'm reading you, certainly more so than your old VP.
Ouch, well, that woke me up, you bronzed buffoon.
What's on the docket today, fam?
Today we're going to rank all the albums by the seminal alternative rock band, the Smashing Pumpkins, simply one of the greatest. Nobody rocked harder than these guys, nobody.
Classic band, underrated. This will be a hoot.
You clowns may ruin these rankings, but I will do my best for our great audience.
That's reassuring. All right, a lot to get through, so let's start with their first album, Gish. Now, when I was living in Chicago in the late 80s and early 90s, Gish was a big deal. These guys were locals who were not looked upon highly by their cooler peers. Then this album came out and sold a shit ton of copies, and I ate it up. While the band had yet to fully form their sound, it remains an impressive and ambitious debut record from a young local band. The drum production alone sets it apart from most of its peers, and songs like Rhinoceros and Siva remain Pumpkins classics. What do you guys think?
Siva and Bury Me both slap pretty hard.
It's great for a local garage band, but as a platinum-selling rock record, it's mid. It's certainly an accomplishment for a record recorded in a few weeks on a small budget.
Yep, more than you've accomplished in 3 painful years, Sleepy Joe.
Shut the hell up, Cheeto. While I can respect this album for what it is, it's not nearly as good as what would come after. The songwriting in particular is forgettable, aside from a couple tracks.
Forgettable? Joe, you're demonstrating once again your mental faculties aren't what they used to be. Tracks like Crush, Snail, and Suffer proved they had the melodicism and lyrical prowess to match the impressive power of the guitars and drums. Can we talk about the guitars, though? The dueling guitar solo at the end of I Am One is legendary, while the dynamics of songs like Siva and Window Pane set the template for the grunge rockers to come. This is an S-tier album.
What malarkey? It's a good record, that's all. Personally, I'd put in C tier, but I could live with B.
We're going to split the difference and put it in A tier. Moving on to Siamese Dream. This album is a classic. While it was a massive commercial hit on the strength of singles like Today and Disarm, it's the deep cuts that really make this a masterpiece. Hummer and Soma, in particular, are some of the greatest songs from this entire era of music.
Hummer is mid, but Soma rips pretty hard, I'm not going to lie.
I'm going to forget what you said about Hummer and say this is an easy S tier.
S tier is right. Disarm is still one of the greatest songs ever written. Every time I hear it, I remember the pain of my hard-scrabble childhood in Scranton, Pennsylvania.
Joe, no one wants to hear about your so-called blue-collar roots. You've been in the upper crust of Washington since the Nixon era.
Can we stay on the subject, please? Trump, do you agree this is S tier?
This is more of an A tier for me. The production is impressive, but the harder rocking songs are too cleaned up and sanitized compared to their live versions. I'll take the Euphoria version of Quiet over the studio version any day of the week. And don't get me started on Silver Fuck. The studio version is not even 9 minutes long. Back in '92, they would jam that bad boy for 20-plus minutes until the crowd reached the point of utter exhaustion. I used to get shit-faced and moshed to that insanity for hours. You could punch people in the face and grab them by the you-know-what, and it was all part of the fun. Man, I miss the 90s.
We all missed the 90s, Trump, before we had to deal with you as an actual political force. Majority rules on this one, S tier. Okay, now here's their undisputed masterpiece, Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness.
Whoa, what happened to Pisces Iscariot?
Pisces is a compilation of B-sides and outtakes, Joe. We are going to have to stick to the official studio albums on this one, otherwise we will be here for a week.
Please tell me we will cover the Zwan album.
No Zwan here. Not now, not ever. Now then, moving on to Melancholy. To put it succinctly, this album helped define a generation. The sprawling scope of the album and its many iconic songs make this an easy S tier.
I remember back in 1995, this album was everywhere. All of my friends and family were jamming this on the daily, and it completely dominated MTV.
I'm surprised you remember that far back, Joe. I feel like you were already a senior citizen back in '95.
I'm only 4 years older than you, Donnie. Some of us age more gracefully than others.
Well, this album has not aged gracefully at all. It has more filler in it than my second ex-wife.
Props for not insulting someone else's wife for a change, Don.
Let me finish, you sad sack. Songs like Love, Take Me Down, and Lily, My One and Only are atrocious. They should have made a single disc album with just the bangers and it would have been great. Instead, we have the first of many bloated, overlong messes from this band. This is B tier at best.
I've heard this single disc argument before and I have to disagree. There's not a track I would cut out of this.
I feel like you're just hating Trump. Those tracks are charming and add to the wide-ranging epic feel of the album. If this isn't an S-tier album, I don't know what is.
We're putting it in S tier and moving on to the fourth album, Adore. While not as commercially successful as the previous albums, for me this is a real step forward for Corgan as a songwriter. Songs like To Sheila, Annie Dog, and Behold the Nightmare contain some of his best lyrics yet, reaching beyond teenage angst into a more classical poetic experience that touches us all.
This album sucks.
How did I know you wouldn't like this one?
Plain and simple, Jimmy Chamberlin was the heart and soul of the Pumpkins. Let the guy go to rehab and pick up where you left off. I love firing people, but they should not have fired Jimmy, and they definitely should not have attempted an album without him, let alone no drummer at all.
It was an odd dynamic, but it resulted in a very unique and rich album.
Unique my ass. In '98, everyone was trying to go techno. REM did the same damn thing and made the sleepiest album of their life.
I thought Up was great. It was my workout album in the later Clinton years.
I rest my case. This whole era was the beginning of the end for alternative rock, and it's no wonder the fans turned away in droves. Thank heavens real rock bands like Korn and Limp Bizkit came along to keep the guitars coming.
Korn and Limp Bizkit are guilty pleasures of mine, and I don't care who knows it.
I'll pretend I didn't hear that, Joe. To your points, Trump, Jimmy was fired for his own good, and the band ended up making the most sophisticated and sonically innovative album of their entire career. It's more universal than their earlier albums, and one I revisit often. For me, it's an obvious S tier.
C tier is as high as I can go on this one.
No way. While it's not the true classic that the previous two are, it's a great album and a true grower. A tier for me.
Okay, I can settle on A tier, but privately it's a desert island album for me up there with Pinkerton and In the Airplane Over the Sea. Now, moving on to Machina, which marked the return of drummer Jimmy Chamberlin.
This tier list has become about as useless as your presidency, Barry.
Let's start with Machina I. Released in 2000, it was the lowest selling album of their career to that point, and they announced their breakup shortly after. This is a tough one to grade. What are your thoughts?
This is their best album until Zeitgeist. Thank God they remembered how to play heavy guitars.
Please let's not mention Zeitgeist more than we have to. As far as Machina goes, it's a compromise in many ways. The band didn't know whether they should pursue the new metal trend that was popular at the time or continue the more mature sound they had explored in Adore, so they split the difference, resulting in an uneven album. They also had to compromise with the record label and release a single disc instead of the planned double album. We'll never know what the complete Machina could have done in the marketplace.
The reissue will be out any year now.
The Machina reissue and Joe fulfilling his campaign pledge to legalize pot, top two on my list of things that will never happen.
Looking at Machina I as it stands today, it's actually a pretty good album and one that deserves more attention. Hidden gems like This Time, Wound, and Age of Innocence are among their best songs ever. Solid A tier for me.
Glass and the Ghost Children is underrated, but this album already feels overlong as a single disc.
That being your favorite song makes me never want to listen to it again, you hair-sniffing wacko.
Any hair sniffing I've done is incidental, Donnie. Get over it. At least I'm not paying hush money to porn stars.
You're just jealous.
Okay, we have a lot to get through still. Can we put this one in B tier and move on?
B tier is generous, but I can live with it.
This album tier list is more disastrous than Joe's Afghanistan pullout.
Now, how about Machina II? The fans tend to like this one more than the first one.
This album is a mess, just like this tier list.
It's certainly an improvement over Machina I. It has a rawness and a vigor that is a refreshing change of pace after the overproduction of the first one.
To me, the unfinished quality of Machina II is a double-edged sword. Tracks like Cash Car Star and Dross are great, but there are too many demo-sounding tracks here to take it as seriously.
It sounds like it was recorded in Ted Cruz's guest bathroom, which is small, very small. Look, there are some legitimate bangers here, but this album is unlistenable.
I like this one, start to finish. For me, it's a return to form for the band after the detour of Adore. I'd say it's a solid A tier.
If you put this in A tier, Barack, so help me God, I will tell my supporters the storm has come and we will rain righteous fury on you and your libtard friends.
Let's put this in B tier and move on.
I can live with that, but only because White Spider slaps.
Now we have the 2007 reunion album, Zeitgeist. This one was pretty divisive when it came out, but it did get a gold certificate.
This album is the undisputed masterpiece of the Pumpkins. The visceral guitars and overwhelming drum performances of Jimmy Chamberlin make it a heart-stopping listen start to finish. The lyrics and themes were a perfect prediction of the 1984-like direction our country is heading in.
I thought the political themes were a bit overdone considering the Pumpkins have never really operated in that arena.
You would think that, you deep state swamp creature.
Hey, we all voted for the damn Patriot Act, Don.
This album got me excited about the band again. They did a great job of recapturing their goth metal glory days. And there are some underrated songs like Never Lost and Bleeding the Orchid that are among the Pumpkins' finest tracks.
Sorry guys, this is a D tier album. It's completely lacking in the subtlety, charm, and adventurousness of their older work. There's almost none of the guitar textures and melodies of the classics. The absence of James and Darcy made the whole reunion feel a bit off. And the production and mix of this album sealed the deal. This is a terrible sounding album.
Jimmy's drums have never sounded better. You're just a wimp who can't appreciate real heavy metal.
I'm a believer in bipartisan compromise, so let's just call this B tier.
Compromising with our enemies is what you're a believer in, Beijing Joe. This album is A tier, at least.
C tier is about as high as I can go on this one.
All right, Barack, I'll follow your lead on this one. Drop it like it's hot.
This tier list is rigged.
C tier it is. Now after this we had Teargarden by Kaleidoscope, which is kind of a gray area, announced as a 44-song album that would be released a song at a time. Instead, we got 2 EPs and 2 singles before they gave up on it and released Oceania. In fairness to the original intent of the project, let's include the first string of Teargarden tracks as an album.
I actually really like this album. It was cool to see Billy back in free territory, writing songs inspired by late 60s psychedelia, and not trying to write a pop hit.
Widow Wake My Mind is easily one of the worst things I've ever heard. This is not an album, it's a bunch of MP3 downloads that went nowhere and no one wanted.
While I like tracks like A Song for a Son and Freak quite a bit, this project was a little all over the place, and I think releasing it a song at a time made it feel less like an album, which may have something to do with why they abandoned the concept.
They abandoned the concept because no one wanted to listen to these shitty songs.
I think time will be very kind to this era of the band. It's A tier for me.
D tier, this is a garbage fire of a non-album.
I'm going to put this in C tier. Moving on to Oceania. This for me is the best work the Pumpkins have done since the reunion. It was great to hear the band attempt something more in line with their classic stuff while still moving the ball forward. Songs like Pinwheels, The Celestials, and the title track are all excellent.
Barry, you're way off as usual. This was a huge step down from Zeitgeist. Zeitgeist was a real man's album. Everything about this album is weak. Violet Rays, it sounds like a Bonnie Raitt track. Quasar, interminable hippie bullshit. The only good track on here is The Chimera.
You're kidding, right?
It's a solid album that comes close to greatness, but ultimately is a little one note compared to their heyday. I think they were playing it safe a little bit here.
The drums sound like a video game. Long gone is the spacious room mic quality of Jimmy's contributions to Zeitgeist. This album is more digital than Joe's last presidential campaign.
While personally I would put it higher, I think B tier would be appropriate.
I cannot believe this is going above Zeitgeist.
B tier is fine, Barack.
Next up, Monuments to an Elegy from 2014. I'm going to be honest, I'm not a fan of this album at all. It's much too short, and all the tracks on it are trying too hard to be pop singles. It's totally lacking the complexity and maturity of the Pumpkins' back catalog, and it shows Corgan's unwillingness to accept his commercial heyday is behind him.
Sorry, Barack, but this is one of the best rock albums in decades. I keep the CD in my Camaro, and it's my favorite Pumpkins album to blast with the top down. Anti-Hero is the song I wish I had had when I was 17, cruising the streets of Scranton looking for kicks.
Usually when Joe is looking for kicks, the FBI has to be called in.
Trump, even you have to agree this album slaps.
It has its moments, but no true hard rock album would be caught dead with diarrhea tracks like Anais and Run to Me. That said, Tommy Lee kicked fucking ass on this album. One and All is a straight banger, and the drums sound huge and natural.
Tommy is underrated, and the mix is better. Still, this is D tier for me. I was relieved when it bombed and forced Corgan to do some soul searching and course correcting for the band, starting with bringing Jimmy back in 2015. 1 or 2 tracks were still played for a year or two, then quickly forgotten.
Barack, we agree on a lot, but you were wrong on Gay Marriage, and you're wrong on this album. A tier.
I can't believe I'm agreeing with Obama on this one. I would put it higher, but pissing off Joe Biden is one of my favorite hobbies.
Okay, D tier it is, and we move into the home stretch of albums with Jimmy Chamberlin and James Iha back in the fold. I want to give a shout out to Corgan's solo album from this period, Ojilala, which in my opinion is his best work in decades.
There's time for that shout out, okay? I get it. This is your show. We're all very impressed.
So the first release of the reunited lineup is called Shiny and Oh So Bright, Volume 1 LP, No Past, No Future, No Sun.
Wait, is that really the title, and why is it in all caps?
Billy Corgan does seem to think the longer the album title, the better the album will turn out. No wonder the best albums they've done are Gish and Zeitgeist.
What are people's thoughts on this one? I actually kind of like this album, though it's still too short.
It's a step down from Monuments. The songs are more forgettable.
Excuse me, Joe, Solara is their best track in years.
Solara is good, but I actually think Silvery Sometimes is their true return to form. It has that nostalgic mix of sadness and new wave groove that made 1979 such a monster hit. Rick Rubin helped them be more selective in what songs made the cut, but there are still a few duds, which is a bad look for an album with only 8 tracks.
There are duds. Truer words have never been spoken. When the album kicks off with those woo-woo-woo vocals, I thought we were in for their worst album yet. But it does have some solid work, like the overlooked Marching On, which showed Corgan could still sing in his old-school snarl and provided a nice showcase for James Iha's guitar screams.
I think you both are being a little generous here. This would have been better as a 4-song EP to help hype the reunion tour. You can't call this an album.
I actually wish this was longer. Songs like Alienation and With Sympathy showed they were capable of exploring deeper themes and a wider musical palette.
I was relieved when it was over. D tier.
We will all be relieved when your administration is over. That said, this is B tier.
We'll split the difference and put this one in C tier. Now moving on, we have the album Sear. This album is a mixed bag for me. I like that they are trying something different and attempting a deeper work. That said, a lot of these songs are forgettable and should have been left on the cutting room floor.
This is a terrible album. The only song on here that rocks is Witch, and even that sounds like some recycled riffs from some old riff tape.
Are you both insane? This is a fantastic album. Songs like The Color of Love and the title track are their most likable and immediate tracks in years.
Of course you would like it. This sounds like a bad imitation of ABBA or the Bee Gees.
No way, Trump. This is a true Gothic album in the tradition of their 80s heroes. Not only that, but songs like Anno Satana and Save Your Tears are in the finest tradition of the classic SP sound.
This album is proof that even with Chamberlain and Iha back in the band, this is still basically a Corgan solo project.
I think that's a bit presumptuous. Chamberlain and Iha would not have signed off on the project unless they believed in it, and their influence can be felt throughout the album. It does have a richer feel to it than the Monuments era, to be sure. There are some great tracks here, and as an Adore fan, I don't mind the more experimental electronic sound.
Adore was a failure, Barry. No reason to try to rehash it, only with worse songwriting.
Trump, you simply have no taste. This is A tier all the way. This album will age very well.
D tier.
I'm going to say B tier. Is that a fair compromise?
What a joke.
I don't like it, but I can live with it.
Okay, B tier it is. Now we have finally arrived to the most recent Pumpkins album, Autumn. This is a 3-part album, the 3rd part of which has just come out on streaming. Have you guys heard this yet?
I'm not going to lie. I listened to the 33 podcast and skipped any track that doesn't have loud, distorted guitars and kick-ass drums. So I've missed about 2/3 of this album, which is for the best.
Trump, I would say I feel bad for you as you are missing out on one of the best albums this band has put out in years. But you are not worthy of my pity, nor anyone else's.
Sticks and stones, Sleepy Joe, I just have to thank you. Since you came along, thousands of people have called me competent and coherent compliments I had rarely gotten before.
I'm going to be honest, I haven't fully digested this album yet. I'm tempted to say it's overlong, but the lesser tracks do seem to have something to them.
This album is a masterpiece. The concept album structure has pushed Corgan to new heights and helps tie together the wide range of sonics.
Did he really say this is a sequel to Mellon, Collie and Machina? This sounds exactly like Sear. The whole thing was made on a computer.
Shut your mouth, Trump. Songs like The Good and Goodbye, Harmageddon, and Beguiled are some of the best rock tracks they've done in years. The overall space rock vibe is a great sonic territory to explore. It reminds me of Bowie and Kraftwerk while having enough of the classic 90s rock sound to please the casual fans. I know it's a brand new album, but this feels like S tier to me.
You've completely lost your marbles, Joe, but everyone in this country knows that. Even your handlers, this album is mid at best.
I do think people are being too harsh on this album. It's hard to call an album overlong if you haven't given it a chance. I think I need to wait for the vinyl release and have a proper listen. Maybe Michelle and I can break out the gravity bong and light some candles like the old days.
You'd have to be high to call this a good album. 4 LPs of this trash, that sounds like torture suitable for Guantanamo Bay.
You haven't experienced torture till you've had to sit through an entire Trump rally?
Ooh, so clever, Joe. I didn't even see your teleprompter.
I think S tier is a bit dramatic, Joe, but I do agree it's a step up from their past few releases. My gut is telling me B tier, but it could grow on me and become an A, as it does seem more cohesive and polished than the Machina albums in their current forms.
Barry, so help me God, if you put this train wreck anywhere above C tier, I am exiting this call.
Do it, Barack. I have a briefing I need to get to anyways, or something along those lines.
Okay, A tier, though I may regret this.
You've got to be fucking kidding me. This is just fuck this later.
Did he leave? I think he left. Well, there it is. I'm sure we'll get plenty of hate for all of this, but it comes with the job description. Joe, you want to get down on some AOE too?
Hell yeah, I'll be on Steam in 20. I got to stock up on Mountain Dew and Pringles.
See you then, Joe. Obama out.